Hi everyone and welcome back to my podcast about human rights. Today's episode is all about human rights issues in the future. And later on we're also going to talk about what every one of us can do to protect them. Here we go. Once again, welcome back to my podcast about human rights. So as you know, human rights are a big part of all our lives, and life wouldn't be the same without them. Not only do they satisfy our basic needs such as food, housing and education and protect against abuse, but also do they guarantee liberty, equality and security for every one of us. This way, we can all take full advantage of all our opportunities and enjoy life. So human rights seem very natural to most of us, because we are all enjoying them and don't know it any other way. However, researches like the Rule of Law Index show that threats to human rights exist in 2/3 of the surveyed 113 countries. Since 2016, the index has reported diminishing scores, so these obviously are not the best anticipations for the future, and therefore I want to give you an overview over the top human rights issues of the future in today's podcast. So, the first issue is human trafficking. This issue is growing around the world, according to numbers from the UNODC, which is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The executive director pointed out that armed groups and terrorists use human trafficking to spread fear. Victims often have to do forced labor, for example. And you might think that human trafficking only happens in specific countries, but in fact, human trafficking isn't limited to any certain countries. Of those trafficked, women and girls make up the majority. And as this issue becomes more severe and widespread, the international community really needs to ramp up its efforts. So, the next issue is the refugee crisis. According to the UN chief, the world is dealing with the highest levels of displacement on record. Reasons include climate change and armed conflict. Refugees fleeing their homes also experience oppression, persecution and discrimination. And according to some reports and researchers, the situation will only get worse in the future. But what can be done? Providing assistance, unfortunately, is expensive. And the 2019 Global Humanitarian Overview estimates that helping the 132 million refugees would require over $20 billion. And because the climate change and armed conflict aren't easily resolved, the refugee crisis will be one of the biggest human rights issues in the future. Next up, we have the worker rights. In Article 32.1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all people have the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protect against unemployment. These rights are threatened around the world in a lot of ways. Injustice like wage theft, discrimination, and physical endangerment occur all the time. Work systems can make work-life balance difficult, taking a toll on employees' mental health. In many places, inadequate pay is also an issue. The federal minimum wage in the United States has remained the same since 2009, while living costs have risen steadily. Imagine that. As we go into a new decade, worker rights will become more significant. So, next up we have the equality of all people, specifically in regards to gender equality and LGBTQ rights. So firstly, gender equality has been a human rights issue for hundreds of years. Even with decades of progress, the World Economic Forum believes it could take the world another century to realize gender equality. That's insane, I think. It's a complicated issue because there isn't just one problem to address. Access to education, political representation, reproductive rights, economic opportunities, and more contribute to gender inequality. Making a significant change and monitoring progress will remain a top human rights issue in the future. Furthermore, the LGBTQ+ rights are not an especially recent human rights issue, but they will evolve in the future. Depending on the country, the state of these rights varies widely. All over the world, definitions are changing and expanding. This makes navigating the issues more challenging and complex for society and the human rights community. In the future, how we approach LGBTQ+ rights and gender identity may change, but standing against discrimination will remain necessary. So, if I tell you the next problem, you probably might not think that it will be an issue in the future, but it might be. And the topic is human rights and technology. Looking at the past, innovation spread at a lightning pace. Inventions like the internet impact how we communicate and how ideas develop. Technology also changes our relationship with powerful institutions. The future will include questions about human rights as they apply to data privacy, the definition of hate speech, surveillance, and digital security. These issues will trigger the development of organizations dedicated to this area. So, the next issue we have is nationalism. Despite 70 years of multilateralism and global leadership from institutions like the UN, nationalism is on the rise. It can especially be found in countries like the United States, Europe, China, and Turkey. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warns that nationalism threatens rights such as the right to life, food, and health. Vulnerable groups like refugees and the LGBTQ+ community face significant danger under nationalism. In the coming years, the world will have to reckon with this shift. So, our next problem has to do a lot with media, and it is attacks on journalists and the spread of misinformation. The concept, definition, and spread of fake news will continue to be a major issue for societies around the world. Fake news, defined as misinformation and propaganda, cause divisions and endangers a free press. Journalists face significant obstacles and dangers to their work and lives. 2018 was the worst year on record for journalists according to Reporters Without Borders. With nationalism gaining strength, this trend will continue, and human rights as a whole suffer when truth and access to information are endangered. And the last issue I want to tell you about today is the climate change. The climate crisis will only get worse as time goes on. Our current state reflects climate scientists' worst-case scenarios. How to respond on this crisis will be one of the world's most serious questions in the future. In a 2019 report, the UN Conference on Trade and Development stated that the energy industry needs a careful transition. Otherwise, the loss of money from the energy industry could cause destabilization internally, regionally, and even internationally. However, a transition is essential for the survival of humanity. How to respond to humanitarian crisis caused by climate change will also be a significant human rights issue in the future. But now let's come to the part that interests all of us the most. What can be done to protect human rights in the future? As we now know, we can be quite sure that human rights will slowly get more and more problematic. States will have to do their parts in protecting human rights, like internationally raising their voices when human rights are being violated and impose sanctions, for example. But every single one of us can do something. You are now about to be told some good options you can do to protect human rights. So the first thing you can do is really simple, and it is speak up for what you care about. It can be just as easy as that, and let me tell you, one brave voice is enough to open up a channel for others to be inspired or share their experience. Furthermore, another option is that you could donate or even volunteer in a global organization. Volunteering in such an organization takes a lot of time and effort, and if you want to do this, great. But also only donating a little bit of money is very helpful for most of these organizations. My next tip for you is be aware of what you buy. The small change of looking for fair trade goods, for example, in a supermarket might cost a little more money, but it might be a big impact for others in their lives, as workers can therefore receive fair wages, safe working conditions, and dignified employment, and much, much more. And my last tip for you is stand up against discrimination. Discrimination has a way of creeping up in places we would not imagine it encountering. But yes, it is there. And most importantly, every one of us can do something. Don't let it slip by when it occurs. Together there are always more people on this earth who can help and uplift others than there are people who tear others down with words or hate. If you want to share your thoughts on this topic with the whole community, no matter whether it is about a human right that is really important for you, or if you have an idea what we can do to protect a specific human right, let us know in the community section down below. So, as we are now slowly coming towards an end, let me give you a short summary. Human rights issues will appear in the future, but if everyone does his and her part, I'm optimistic that we will be able to protect human rights in the future, so that a safe and self-determined life will be possible in the future as well. So thanks a lot for joining today's episode and see you next time. Bye!